I'm talking today about a very contemporary, maybe an issue which is being talked a lot about, and you will be probably hearing about it and reading about it in the newspapers a lot these days. That's about, again, maybe one of the side effects of, or maybe spillover effects of COVID-19. That's about attracting foreign capital, which is likely to exit China. uh, Government of India is talking about it, and government of Karnataka, all those who are now in Karnataka know about it, that Karnataka government also has done some initiative on this. So I'll be just trying to highlight the whole process, the whole thinking that is going on in terms of attracting this part of the capital to India. Before going to that, I think I will have to very briefly give an overview. Many of you may be very familiar, but still an overview in terms of the role of foreign capital. Uh, During the pre-globalization period, that is up to 1990, foreign capital used to come to India, but in very little quantities. Whatever capital used to come, it used to come mostly in the form of joint ventures. uh, Indian government had a policy of essentially borrowing from other countries and from international institutions and investing it mostly in our public sector. Of course, there is also private sector investment that is raised institutionally from outside India, especially from institutions like International Financial Corporation, but that used to be a very small amount. Now, because we relied heavily on borrowing and investing mostly in our public sector, we ended up in a situation of almost falling into the debt trap. Number one, because our debt mounted. Number two, because our public sectors could not perform to the extent that we were hoping for, and therefore the debt mounted and we couldn't repay it. And finally, we ended up with a foreign exchange crisis by late 1980s. And it is a story which most of you are very familiar with. Therefore, the post-globalization, that means post-1990, when we started economic liberalization, Government of India pursued a very different path of finding sources for investment. So instead of borrowing and ending up with a debt, we opened up and we started attracting global capital to come in. Now, the advantage is when the capital comes in, it's not a commitment on the part of the borrower or the government to repay, because it's a commitment of the investor. So our debt is not likely to increase. However, there are other issues that you will be allowing foreign capital to make a profit here and take back the profit, and there are so many issues involved, but I'm not going in detail into that. Essentially, we allowed greater amount of foreign capital to come into our country post 1990. When we had our problem in 1989 precisely, our foreign exchange situation was very, very grave. It is normally said that every country should have foreign exchange resource enough to meet 2 years future obligations. These days we say at least 6 months future obligations. But in 1990, when we had the crisis, our total foreign exchange reserve was not even sufficient to meet 6 weeks future obligation. That was our problem, and we all know that Government of India, through Reserve Bank of India, had to use the Reserve Bank of India's gold as collateral and raise money. So we were in that critical situation. But after we allowed foreign capital to come in, our situation improved in that direction, and today we have enough foreign exchange reserves. On that count, I think India is sitting quite pretty. Foreign exchange, capital has its own pros and cons. I'll come to that a little later. Now, the foreign capital that is coming into India is broadly in two forms. One is, of course, the foreign direct investment. The other one is the portfolio investment. Foreign direct investment, as you all know, is a capital that comes in where the investor comes in, invests, takes the risks, runs the business, and only takes the profit. Whereas portfolio investment is that part of the foreign capital which actually gets into our capital market in the form of foreign institutional investors, and it buys shares and bonds in our capital market. Their risk is only the risk of the market. So if the market is strong, they may simply sell off their shares and take back the money. If in FDI, that is not possible. Unfortunately for India, at present, out of the total foreign capital that comes into India, bulk of the foreign capital is in the form of portfolio investment, not in the form of FDI. So we really want to increase foreign direct investment instead of simply allowing foreign institutional investors to invest in our capital market. Now, the foreign capital has two sides of it. One side of it is when it comes, we all know that the debt of the government will not increase. But on the other extreme, there is a possibility that foreign capital might generate a lot of surplus by selling goods and services domestically and then take back that profit, because capital is invested by the foreign company and the dividend goes to them. And the dividend may be very high also. So there is this kind of a thing. Of course, there are checks and balances that can be put, and we can always make sure that the FDI will not be too loosely allowed to come in. All those kinds of things are possible, but still it has both sides. But as of now, India badly needs foreign capital because our resource generation capacity is limited. We want to grow at a particular rate. To grow at that rate, we need resources, but we already have fiscal deficits. We cannot go on simply minting money. We cannot go on domestically borrowing. We cannot go on raising loans. And therefore, getting capital is very important, because along with the capital, technology comes, and then capital helps us to create jobs. So there is no doubt that foreign capital is required. So we are obviously looking for good sources of foreign capital. Now, COVID has opened up a chance. That is, suddenly capital is likely to be pulled out from China. So that part of capital might go to different parts of the world. So here we stand a chance of attracting that capital. So my focus today is to talk about what is it that is happening to this capital in China, who are all the countries that are likely to be withdrawing from China, and of that, which countries are likely to come to India, and for that, what should we do? So this is the focus of my talk today. So the context is, China has been a major destination for foreign capital. All of you know it is the world's second largest recipient of foreign capital. First continues to be the United States. Second is China. In Asia, it is number one. In the last 20 years, especially in the last 10 years or so, China has emerged as a very important economic force in the world thanks to foreign direct investment. And China by 2018 had attracted a foreign capital to the tune of $140 billion. And please remember, post 1990, India also attracted foreign capital to a very large extent. We also say that we are a very important recipient of foreign capital. However, China received $140 billion. As against that, the foreign capital that India received is 42 billion US dollars. So this is just a comparison. And in China, there have always been problems with Chinese capital, because we know that China is not a very open economy. China has a very closed system. China has a very vague legal structure, which is not very compatible with global standards. So there have been problems. At the same time, in the last few years, there is continued decline in the growth in China. And then there is this trade dispute with United States. Then domestic legal complexities. All these were bothering investors. But they were investing in a big way in China because China provided them very quick clearance for foreign capital. And China, most importantly, provided the cheap labor. So capital was moving there. And now, because of the COVID-19 issue, many countries are thinking that, okay, enough is enough. Okay, now we have so much of problem. And to continue to be in China also could be very risky, not only for capital, but also for people. Therefore, many countries are likely to pull out from China. Some countries have already said that they will be pulling out, and some countries may come out of China. It is therefore an opportunity for countries like India to try and attract this capital. Let us take a look at who are all investing in China. Because if we want to attract this capital to India, we should be also familiar with who are these investors, which countries are investing in China, and which of these countries likely to pull out. Okay. Out of the total foreign capital that goes into China, over 70% actually goes from Hong Kong. Now, this is very, very interesting. Okay. I think you know about the story of Hong Kong. Hong Kong is at present part of China. United Kingdom handed over Hong Kong a decade ago to China. But Hong Kong remains a global financial center. The rules in Hong Kong, the regulations in Hong Kong, legislations in Hong Kong are very different from legislations in mainland China. Okay. So Hong Kong, you can just enter Hong Kong as a free international traveler. Okay, that's the situation in China. Hong Kong is an global investment center. It was always a global investment center much before getting into China. So if Hong Kong is contributing a large amount, it also means indirectly that a lot of American or European capital is moving through Hong Kong to China. But it is officially not United States investing or United Kingdom investing, but it is officially Hong Kong investing in China, over 70% of the total capital. However, there are also others which are directly investing in China. There are many major players there. For example, most important we have is Taiwan. But Taiwan again is a country which is half independent, half part of China, because China has been contending that Taiwan is part and parcel of China. Okay? So it's that kind of a territory. Then Singapore and Virgin Islands. These are the two important countries which have invested in China. Now, both of them, please remember, they are not investing their own capital, because both Singapore and Virgin Islands are primarily global financial centers, which means again, global capital goes to different destinations via Singapore or via Virgin Islands. So it's not their own capital. But there are also countries which have their own money being directly invested in the form of FDI. United States is a major stakeholder, and USA has invested in China basically to meet its own import requirements, because manufacturing within United States is going to be expensive. Therefore, many US companies invest in China and import that back. Now, that's the real problem for US and China. Now the trade war is going on. The President Trump is threatening that they are going for moratoriums, blockade, all kinds of things, but they are finding it very, very difficult not to import it. Because if they stop importing from China, American economy would be affected. Partly also, Americans are producing in China for their export, but mostly for domestic import. A few other important global exporters, particularly in electronics and capital goods kind of industries, Netherlands, Germany, Spain, and Switzerland, they are also important investors in China, and they have invested in China basically to supply their producers to other countries by producing it China and making it cheap. So these are the other countries. Among the Asian players, important countries that have invested in China are Korea and Japan. And these two countries have invested in China both for their domestic requirements as well as for their export. Again, because these two economies grew very fast and they became fairly developed, and therefore their own costs at the domestic operation level has increased. Therefore, they started moving out to China. Now, this is a landscape of the sources of foreign capital to China. Now, it's very important for us to know who among them are likely to exit. Okay, who is likely to bring that capital back. So those who are likely pulling out. Now, as I said, 70% of the capital is from Hong Kong, but Hong Kong is part of China, and therefore there is a very slim chance that Hong Kong will pull out. Of course, part of the capital may indirectly flow out because some countries which have been bringing capital through Hong Kong may now not do that, which might only say that the future capital flows may be affected, but the existing capital is not very likely to be pulled out. Okay, now this we have to keep in mind. That means even if we are talking about a large, exit from China, it is still not as large as we think it would be, right? So it will remain. Hong Kong is definitely, I think, not going to be an important country that would pull out and invest somewhere else. Further, Hong Kong, Singapore, Virgin Island are financial centers, basically through which US and European capital is routed to China. Now, US and European countries have routed their capital through Hong Kong because the rules and regulations, the legislations of Hong Kong are much better compatible with global standards than legislations in China. The mainland China legislations are not applicable to Hong Kong. Okay, so because of this, all these countries thought that their capital will be safer if they take this route, and it is safe. Okay, because any dispute with Hong Kong will be settled through much broader global systems, and therefore that part of the capital is generally safe. So we have to remember that even though Singapore, Hong Kong, Virgin Islands have all invested, number one, uh, these are not their own capital. Number two, these countries have their own rules and regulations which are very different from China, and therefore this capital is not very likely to exit China. But still, there is a big amount that's been directly invested by the US and the European countries that I have already mentioned. Some of them are likely that they would immediately stop further expansion, and in a phased manner, they might even pull out from China. If suppose you assume that in the next election, if the same Republican Party comes to power in US, that means if President Trump gets re-elected, there is every possibility that the hostility between China and US would escalate. Now, if that happens, there is a likelihood that US might finally decide, okay, let me come out. In any case, US is already is seeing China as a competitor, and China has become a very important force, not only an economic force, it was also an important military force next to US. It's also becoming politically significant. Now, for example, US is saying that World Health Organization is very soft to China, right? Because China is funding World Health Organization in a big way. So these kinds of things are coming. China is becoming a big power. Therefore, there is a likely tussle between US and China. If that happens, US may pull out, and some European countries like Germany, Switzerland also might partially pull out from China. However, the most likely countries that would definitely they have shown the signs of exiting China are Korea and Japan are most likely countries. In fact, both of them have problems with China, which is not only COVID problem, not only business problem. They have various problems with China, and both of them have even said that we are going to pull out from China. So among the sources that are likely to exit China, on the one side we have part of US capital, part of European capital, and most of Korean and Japanese capital, which is likely to come out of China. Now, who among them is interested in China? This is also, I think, very important for us to know, because 1 minute, let me just keep my eye on the time. Okay, so why, I mean, who we should know who is likely to come to us. This is also important because we will have to think in terms of evolving the policies, and we have to make the rules and regulations put in place to attract those countries. Therefore, we should be clear also in our mind who is likely likely to come to India. Capital from United States is likely to prefer Southeast Asia over India. Hence, only a small dose of capital from US might come to India. Now, we have to always remember this, that the trend of US investment in Asia has always clearly shown that the US is more tuned to Southeast Asia than South Asia. Okay, for example, US capital is more likely to go to the Philippines, more likely to go to Thailand, more likely even to go to Korea, because they have been more within the friendly group of the United States for a long time, and US has stronger presence there. Okay, US had even occupied Philippines for some time. So this is likely, I mean, this is my hunch, that globally also it is felt that US is more likely to prefer Southeast Asia. However, because of changed situations, maybe there is a possibility that part of that capital might come to South Asia. And in South Asia also we have competition. We should remember that we have very small countries which are attracting big capital, both Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. Given their size, the total capital compared to India may look small. But for their size, what they are attracting is quite big. That also we have to remember. Anyway, that's the American part. The European countries, basically, if they pull out from China, they have a compulsion to invest in East Europe. Now, we have to remember that when the European Union is formed, many East European countries, which were all former communist countries, which all started following different route of development after the fallout of Soviet Union, okay, after the late 1980s. And then, of course, East and West Germany joined together, and then one by one, Hungary and Poland, all of them, they started following the market economy, and slowly many of them got integrated into European Union. So the East European part needs capital. East European capital, East European countries need developmental inputs, and European countries are more likely to take their capital there, partly because it is very close to them, partly and they are part of the European Union, and partly because there will be a compulsion, that you have to invest there. So this is one chance. Again, even if they want to come to Asia on cost considerations and other considerations, even for Europeans, Southeast Asia would be a first preferred area. Okay, so they would either start routing their capital in the through the new financial centers in Asia, like Dubai, a new financial center in Asia, or maybe Mauritius, another financial center. So they might start following that route, or they might go more into Southeast Asia. So this is a likely scenario. Korea and Japan are most likely to focus on India and within South Asia also, for various reasons. The first and foremost is they already have a strong presence in India, and the present political equations are very favorable for both Korea and Japan to come to India. Of course, Japan in particular, and Korea to some extent, have their investment in Southeast Asia, in particular in Thailand. And they have now seen within Southeast Asia, Vietnam as an important destination, because post merger, North South Vietnam and South Vietnam following economic reforms, Vietnam is one of the fastest growing economies. They are also looking at Vietnam, but there is a constraint for them there, constraint about English, constraint about trained technological manpower, and constraint of cost. All these three are addressed by India, and therefore both Korea and Japan are more likely to come to India. Therefore, I think our approach, I mean, if our government is now talking, or if even state governments are talking about attracting this capital from China, our policy focus should be decided based on who are the most likely candidates that would bring capital into India. Now, let me focus on Korea and Japan, thinking that these two are the most likely countries that would be interested to bring capital into India. Let's look at Korea. When I am talking about Korea, it is South Korea, not North Korea. South Korea already has built a very good global image in certain areas, in particular automobile and electronics. These are the two areas where South Korea is very strong. I'm sure we are very familiar with the names like Samsung. I think most of you use their mobile. We're very familiar with Hyundai in automobile, Daewoo and LG. So there are many of the South Korean companies about which India is already familiar. They already have substantial presence in these two sectors in India. Their automobiles compete with other global brands, and Samsung, I think, is in terms of its sales and revenue probably the global leader. In terms of maybe its value chain globally, next only to Apple. Okay, so something like this. But there are problems with Korea. I mean, the pattern of capital that is likely to come from Korea. One issue is Korea is not a force in the area of infrastructure development. Korean investment is more likely to move towards the consumer sector. That means automobile electronics in particular, less likely to move into infrastructure development. That means if you want Korea to come and invest on Indian roads or on Indian metro railway system or something like that, Korea is unlikely because Korea has not seen that as an important area of their investment. Korea has also said that they are very much keen to invest in India. In fact, they even made an announcement. They came to India, they talked to government of India, and they said they want to invest in India, but they have put some condition that India needs to reform its investment climate and liberalize its investment climate. India should become more investor friendly. Only then we can come in. Okay, so we want to come, but we don't want to come in the present scenario. You need to change the rules of the game if you want us to come in. So this is what Korea seemed to be telling. If you look at Korean capital in India, again, we need to also say that Korea has a stronger presence in the national capital region. That means Delhi, Noida, Gurgaon area. It also has a strong presence in Gujarat. Not so much in South India. I'm talking from the perspective of my state and maybe South Indian states, that if you are thinking in terms of attracting foreign capital, it's not only India, but also a question of our own regions, because state governments have started taking initiatives. Therefore, I'm saying this, it's quite unlikely that bulk of this capital will come to South Korea, even though Korean capital has its presence both in Tamil Nadu and in Andhra Pradesh. They have it, but generally, the capital is more likely to focus on national capital region and states like Gujarat. Okay, this is the scenario with Korea. And what about Japan? I'm saying this on 2-3 counts. One is I am more familiar with the Japanese economy and the nature of it, mainly because of my long-standing interaction with many Japanese universities. Second, because there have been already discussions taking place, especially in Karnataka. There have been ideas being thrown out that Japan is more keen to come to India. And there are all indications Japan is now under tremendous pressure to pull out from China, and therefore they have to find ways of investment. So it is immediate necessity for them. Therefore, I think we need to focus on Japan and look at the possibilities that we have with Japan. Japan has stronger reasons to exist China. Okay, more than Korea. You may know that Japan has a very, what can I say, very villainish history. Pre-World War, Japan invaded many regions up to Russia and China. So China and Japan, in that sense, don't like each other because Japan invaded China. Japan captured Korea. So Korea also has problems with Japan. In fact, North Korea has, always shown this aggressiveness, basically keeping Japan as the target. Okay, Philippines, so most of the South Asian countries where Japan was trying to invade them prior to the war. So they have this love-hate kind of a relationship with this region. Therefore, China has one of that, and there are many political factors that are contributing to this. For example, China and Japan has a long-standing problem with border in the sense there are some islands, and Chinese say they belong to them, and Japanese say it belongs to them, and there have been continuous conflict because of that. And the Sea of Japan, starting from fishing to movement of ships. Um, Japan calls it the Sea of Japan. China calls it the South China Sea. Okay, so even with the name, starting from that, they have this issue of problem both on water and on land. And then China recently overtook Japan as a economic force. I think you all know that earlier US was the world's largest economy, and second was Japan, and that position was now taken over by China. And many of the areas where Japan used to be strong, China has now developed technology, for example, aerospace and railway transportation. Two key areas of strength of Japan. China has also become strong. And over and above that, in the last 15 years, many times Japan faced health related problems because of the producers imported from China. So they were continuously in a dilemma whether they have to continue there or not. And now COVID-19, immediately after China, the second country to be affected was Japan. Because a lot of Chinese, move to Japan, or Japanese move to China. So they have found it very difficult now to manage with China, and therefore they have stronger reasons to pull out, and immediately they have to think of relocating that capital. Second, Japan will be more interested to invest in India because, again, number one, the Abe Modi factor. I call it Abe Modi factor. Abe is the Prime Minister of Shinzo Abe, is the Prime Minister of Japan, and Modi are very close. They have been talking about it a lot. Again, a bit of history may be very interesting for those who do not know. In fact, when the World War occurred and finally Japan was defeated, there were people who were, grouped into war criminals, important war criminals, people who were responsible in Japan, becoming so aggressive and aligning with Germany, and finally, US had to put this atomic bomb and all that. And one of them, who was the prime accused, was Shinzo Abe's grandfather. And his grandfather, when he was being tried, he was saved. That means he could save his life mainly because of the interpretation of the law done by one of the Indian judges who was sitting on the International Court of Judgment. Okay, so that judge of Indian origin had argued that it is impossible for you to put the blame of a war on any one individual or a few individuals, because once a war starts, the whole nation gets involved. And as a consequence of this argument and first dissent and then argument, his life was saved. I am not saying that Shinzo Abe is grateful to India because his grandfather was saved, but there is this connectivity, and that connectivity has always made him soft to India. And of course, Abe and Modi ji seem to be more friendly, and they have been talking about it a lot. Second, as per Japanese government, as per Japanese constitution, Japan cannot have an army. So they say section 9 of clause 9 of the Japanese constitution says Japan cannot have a military. They have a very small self-defense force, but mostly for their protection, they depend on US because they have a agreement with United States, and United States has a military base in one of the Japanese islands in Okinawa, so they depend on that. Now, they also want probably a kind of a neutralizing force in Asia, because in Asia, you don't have an alternative military power to China. The only one which is strong enough within Asian region to China or anywhere closer to China is India. So Japan could also see that India is a military force which can help neutralizing China's domination on the Asian region. Okay, this is another factor. India also is seen as a source of rare earth materials. Okay, now this rare earth material is a very protective kind of an area. One example for rare earth is, for example, uranium. Okay, now this is a very important area. There are different kinds of rare earth materials which are highly essential for a lot of scientific innovations. And Japan used to get rare earth material from China, but this is a very delicate thing. Japan cannot depend on China anymore for its rare earth requirements. And India is one of those countries which probably is seen by Japan as a source for getting rare earth material. Now, these are never spoken about, but these are the hidden kind of a thing, where people will be looking at different possibilities. Ifs and buts. I'm not saying that this is a factor, but possibilities. And so already they have strong presence in India. That's another thing. And therefore, maybe it is easier for Japan to come into India. And Japanese government has recently declared, it's actually announced a package of 2.2 billion US dollars, particularly to help those companies which are pulling out from China and relocating elsewhere. That means Japan government has officially said, if any Japanese company is coming out of Japan and wants to relocate, government of Japan will help them. Okay, so a $2.2 billion worth of fund has been announced by the government. So it's a clear indication that Japan is pulling out from China in a fairly big way. Okay, now should we focus on Japan? And if yes, now why should we focus on Japan? What is it that Japan has which is better than Korea, for example? Okay, so I'm trying to logically bring this whole thing by first explaining, for example, who are the investors in China, and among them who are likely to come out, and among the ones who are likely to come out, where will they be interested in, and who is interested in India, and among those who are interested in China, major shares, and then its strengths and its limitations. And I'm talking about Japan, its strengths, and also, of course, its limitations. So, in terms of looking at Japan, if we are saying why Japanese capital is important, unlike Korea, Japan has its strong presence in different areas which are actually required for us. For example, Japan has a strong engineering sector, including capital goods. Japan is strong not only in automobiles, it is strong in other capital goods as well. For example, they can supply you machinery, unlike Korea. You can get machinery from US, you can get machinery from Germany. You cannot get machinery from Korea. You can get machinery from Japan. Okay, something like this. So they are quite good. And capital goods are very important for us because we are spending a lot of money, a lot of our foreign exchange on importing capital goods. Okay, so this is important. So that means production of capital goods is more important than production of consumer durables. This is what I'm trying to say. And Japan can do that. And look at the areas of strength of Japan: petrochemicals, alternative energy, robotics, technology for disaster management. These are areas where Japan is a front runner. Okay, so they have their presence in those areas. Japan also can significantly contribute to infrastructure development. Okay, as you know, they have already been investing huge amount of money in the bullet train project that is now going on, like that. So steel, transportation, shipbuilding, which have been traditionally the stronghold of Japan, so it is possible that their investment can actually come in those areas. Japan has strong global presence in other modern technology related areas like semiconductors, bioindustry, aerospace, pharmaceuticals, and non-ferrous materials. Right? So just look at the canvas. Okay, and Japanese economy depends to a large degree on small and medium industries, and that is the segment where in India also we needs that segment is to be strengthened. So there is this landscape of Japanese investment pattern, Japanese industry pattern, and the strong areas of Japan. So if we want capital, particularly in the form of FDI to come in, it looks very much that the Japanese capital probably should be preferred, and we should do something to get that capital more and more into India. There is the other side. We have to always remember that. For example, Japanese are known to be very conservative in terms of their approach. They want closed kind of investments more important. For example, there used to be a talk some time ago, some mechanism like a specialized what do you call it, SEZ, okay, specialized SEZ, country specific SEZ, something like this. So negotiating with them may not be very easy, but given the nature of expertise they have and given the requirements of our economy, I think there is a better match. And given the possibility of that capital coming in also, there is a better prospects. So this is what I see in case of possibility of Japan pulling out and possibility of that capital coming to India, or the need for India to work on attracting that part of the capital. Okay. So what have we done? I'm not talking now only about Japan, but in general about attracting this part of the foreign capital that is exiting China, in order to bring it to India. What have been done so far? The central government, Prime Minister in particular, has already articulated in some of his speeches also that we need to get and realize the situation that capital is exiting China. We have to do something to attract that capital into China. I mean, that capital exiting China to India. It is also said, though it is not officially announced, that government of India has already identified specific areas to which they want capital to come in, not just Japanese capital. Please remember, I'm talking about that part of the capital which is likely to exit China. Okay, so the areas identified are said to be electricals, pharmaceuticals, heavy engineering, I said capital goods, okay, solar equipments, food processing, medical infrastructure, chemicals. Now these are the areas which government of India, it seems, has zeroed on, and it wants to attract capital into these areas. It has also identified some states where these capital can go, okay, and the identified states are Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, and Andhra Pradesh. Now this is not official. It is said that the government is thinking on these lines. Now there are reasons why that is being done. For example, these are the states which have come forward to provide land, most important input, electricity and water, very, very critical things. And some of the other states probably are not in the priority because they cannot provide that, right? So very important. I'm coming to later part about Karnataka, because I am from Karnataka. So this list doesn't have Karnataka anyway. And yesterday, our finance minister has announced about the opening up of some of the sectors for private and external capital, including defense. Right. So it is quite likely that government of India might encourage the capital coming out of China to even get into some of those areas, either directly in the form of FDI or maybe in the form of a joint venture. That depends, or maybe by starting an Indian offshoot of a company, something like that. So quite likely that that also may be done. However, so far, there is no official policy statement, or there is no official policy that has been declared as to what are we going to do to attract this capital. Now, of course, we all know that government of India cannot come out with a separate policy only to attract the capital that is coming out of China. It is not possible. However, they'll have to announce the policy changes for investment so that those who are anyway moving out and are looking for alternative will immediately find India more attractive. To do that, there will have to be specific policy initiatives which has not been announced now so far on a larger footing in terms of enriching our overall investment climate. So that needs to be done. Okay. So what should be our focus? If we really want to get this capital now, okay, now it is easier to get that capital because capital is coming out and immediately they want to find a place for investment. Okay, so they will be in a less negotiating mode. That means we can give less and take more. There is a possibility of that kind, and therefore I think we will have to work about that. So what should be done? What should be done? I think focus should be on country specific, and look east should be our priority. So we cannot simply have a very generalistic kind of a policy. I think we have to look at country wise and devise our policy, which is very, very important. And look east, I think, is the most important one. Look east, and when I'm saying, I think you worry less about the European capital or the US capital, worry more about the Korean capital and the Japanese capital, which I think is a wiser way for us to approach now, I mean, given the present circumstances. Second, there will have to be measures to attract capital, particularly from Japan, because given the background, that I have said, that these are the different areas where they can actually invest, and they now have a political equation on which it makes government of Japan to also push this idea, for those companies to move into India. So we have both the pull factor and the push factor working in our favor if we are really, attracting capital from Japan. Therefore, I think India should have some specific measures keeping Japanese capital in mind. All foreign capital coming henceforth should be in the form of FDI, with Indian participation, not in the form of portfolio investment. This is very, very important. I think we really don't want foreign institutions to come and invest, big in our capital market, unless, of course, Indian companies raise capital directly from outside India. Essentially, what we are looking for is the foreign direct investment. Of course, there will have to be Indian participation. That means equity will have to be diluted. Indians should be able to invest there so that we will not face a situation of entire dividend flow going out of India. These measures, of course, are needed. Plus, of course, they should source from India, and some of those conditions are required. But FDI is what we should focus on. Small and medium industries and infrastructure development should be given special incentives. So I think if in the form of foreign direct investment, a medium scale or a small scale in their sense, okay, company of another country is coming into India, we need to have a different kind of a policy framework, because we essentially want every industry to get decentralized, located in places where industries are not crowded, create local employment. So this is what we are now looking for. And therefore, I think instead of the big multinationals, we should be focusing on the relatively smaller size companies and encourage them to come into this country. So this, I think, is a scenario which is going to work in our favor if we really do that. Okay, lastly, I want to also examine the approach by Karnataka government on what Karnataka government has done. This I thought I'll do because I was thinking that essentially I'll be speaking basically to Karnataka participants, but I see over 200 or so participants here, and I have also seen many of them from Tamil Nadu, Andhra, etc. So my apologies for this Karnataka specific slide, but I wanted to share this with the majority of the participants who are from Karnataka. Okay, what Karnataka has been now doing with regard to attracting that part of the capital which is exiting China. Karnataka has recently announced setting up of a task force. It's already been done. I think you know about it. A month or so ago, the industry minister had a meeting with industry stakeholders and all that, and then they made a proposal, and then under the chairmanship of the chief secretary, a task force has been set up by government of Karnataka. It will also have representatives from different countries. that is investing countries in order to work out the mechanism for attracting this capital. But Karnataka has a disadvantage. Most important is the three critical elements that industries are looking for: land, electricity, and water. I think in South India, both Andhra and Tamil Nadu are better placed in all these three counts. Andhra, a little bit, maybe not water, but water also, I think, probably much better. Karnataka has a disadvantage among the southern states on these three counts. However, Karnataka has a strong presence of some of the countries, most importantly, a country like Japan. In Karnataka, the best example is highest number of Japanese companies in India are found in Bangalore. Okay, so this is, I mean, in terms of number, if you look at all Japanese companies working in India in different parts, then highest number are found in Bangalore, in and around Bangalore. So we have a very strong Japanese presence in Karnataka, and Karnataka has a Japanese consulate in Bangalore. Karnataka has the Karnataka Japan Friendship Association, which has been working now for, I think, well over a decade and a half. Actually, you have a strong presence of the Japanese living in Bangalore, and also the Japanese and trade exchange or trade fair and trade promotion activities between Karnataka and Japan has been going on now for well over 6-7 years on a regular basis. So this kind of a foundation is already laid. So for the state governments, I would say, keeping Karnataka as an example, I think an ideal situation would be that they should set up a country-specific task force. Instead of a task force for all capital in general, where you will make members of all countries sit together and talk about it. Okay. So you can also have a country-specific task force so that your negotiation will be country-specific. You will be talking, a state will be talking to one country, and it is possible to open up at that time, I think, much better, and work out and fine tune the investment flows much better. So that's, I think, one very important thing. If that happens, then among the capital exiting China and coming to India, Karnataka probably is better place to attract the Japanese capital. But the rider is land, electricity, water. Now, this provision, of course, is to be made. We have to identify the land and electricity, and this has to be ensured. But the good thing with Japan is, with regard to electricity or with regard to energy, alternative energy, Japan itself has a better technology, and they can actually invest and produce electricity by themselves, and the surplus electricity can be shared for the state use. That also is possible. So given that, I think Karnataka can work out its strategy in general. Okay, so this is overall about what I wanted to say.